started. So this is the second cyber seminar of this series that we're going to try and work through a lot of background and also hands-on demonstrations and also discussions in the next this spring, starting now. And this is the second one, kind of the first in a series of introductions about how to share data, both the motivation of why to share, and then a little bit about how we're have decided to share data for the CZOData project. There's not going to be a huge amount of hands-on demo here. Kerstin is going to discuss the motivation behind data publication with a capital P, which is a kind of a relatively new concept. And then at the very end, I'm going to discuss how the CZO data portal supports that capability. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Kerstin.
All right. So let's get started. I don't know if any one of you, by any chance, attended the data publication workshop that we ran at the last fall meeting of the AGU. Most of the slides are a reuse from that presentation. It was a lunch workshop, and all the slides are available on SlideShare under AIDA data publication. But I think, as far as I know from Anthony, this is recorded, and the slides will be available on the CZO, on the Critical Zone website. So I wanted to start off with basically giving you a definition of data publication and the reason why we distinguished data publication with a capital P here. Making data sets available to others and sharing data is something that we're used to, and many people have put up data sets on their website or submitted them to data compilations, databases, and so on. And that's what we define as a small p, because it's very informal, and as you well know, a website can disappear. People don't maintain it. You get your 404 error. So it's sharing data, but it doesn't have a formal process behind it. Data publication with a capital P takes care of that, in that it's a formal publication of data that is similar to publishing your research results in the scholarly literature. Data publication with a capital P makes data citable. It ensures that there is persistent access to the metadata about a data set and the data themselves, and a certain level of quality assurance that makes the metadata fit into existing standards for data citation. So let me go to well, the next slide wasn't the next slide, but just emphasizing the capital P is what we're talking about today. So why do we talk so much about data publication these days? I mean, it is clear that access to data is absolutely key to science, and that the sharing of data is actually building scientific communities. And I think the Critical Zone Observatory community is a really good example for that, that you want to share information, that's data that is being generated, measurements out in the field, experiments in the lab. And that builds the community. These are actually, I should refer to the origin of this slide, this wording. It's from Micah Altman, who's Director of Research at the MIT Libraries, and I think he really summarizes really nicely the reasons or the motivation for data publication. So one is really the scientific collaboration around data, the sharing of data to work together towards certain scientific goals. And the second one is that data are clearly needed for scientific replication, and we know many examples for that. Micah here says that what is the value of an article if it cannot be replicated? But it's been shown, especially over the last few years as data publication has become such a big topic, that many published articles, the research results that are presented cannot be replicated because data aren't accessible or not in the right format, do not have the right metadata, and so on. So that's absolutely critical. The reason why there is so much discussion right now is that, as you all know, we have a huge increase in the data volumes that are becoming available for the scientific community in a way, actually, that publishers can't quite deal with the data and can't capture them and maintain them. So that's what has triggered new paradigms in publishing, plus actually the capabilities of online publishing are becoming much more, or giving articles a much more dynamic character now. On the other hand, most of you will have heard about EarthCube, for example. There are rapidly expanding cyber infrastructure capabilities for data mining, for data analysis, data visualization, and so on, that only function if the data are available online and in a structured and standardized format. And the last one, which is sort of the stick behind it all, is the growing enforcement of policies for open access to research data. And that, just emphasizing, many of you may have seen this, that in the past year there were two releases of executive orders from the Office of Science and Technology Policy from the government to better share federally funded data, and that clearly pertained to the National Science Foundation and other federal agencies. The second one was in May, an executive order to actually make the data machine readable and openly accessible, ensuring that all the search engines and data analysis tools that are being built can actually take advantage of the data that are out there. This is just another slide of this executive order. I encourage you to read about that, and it is really driving a lot of what NSF is doing with respect to enforcing their data policies these days. And yeah, just showing you again, the National Science Foundation has had data policies for many years, policies for dissemination and sharing of research results through articles and so on, but it's becoming more focused on data sharing now. And you all know data management plans have to be provided at the moment. There isn't a very structured approach to actually checking on compliance with the promises made in a data management plan, but that will be rapidly evolving over the next few years. On the other hand, also the publishers and professional societies are catching up on their data policies and aligning them with these developments. And AGU just released a new data policy in December. It was voted upon by the Council right before the AGU fall meeting, basically supporting the open and full access to data. The other aspect of data publication is that it can ensure the proper citation of the data, and it can give credit, it will give credit to the actual creators of the data, independent of publications. It can give credit to all those data that have not become part of published articles, but also to data that were included in a published article. And a number of efforts have focused on this. The most prominent being DataCite, an international organization that emphasizes, promotes the idea of data citation and provides guidelines and infrastructure for it. It basically promotes the use of digital object identifiers, DOIs, for data sets independent of the DOIs of the articles, but both of them linked together were appropriate. We're seeing the advance of data citation also with publishers and with citation indices such as the data citation index that Thomson Reuters released last year to make the citation of data also be more traceable, more tractable. A lot of national and international organizations that deal with data publication more on the library side of sciences have looked into principles of data citation. How should it be done? How should data be mentioned in publications or on websites? What is being tracked of data? Is a citation on a website the same as a citation in a peer-reviewed journal and so on? But emphasizing also the relevance of data citation to the academic management, to policymakers, and so on. So check out, if you're interested in this, check out the website of Force 11, which is an organization that really focuses on the principles and implementation of data citation, that just released a declaration of data citation principles, emphasizing again that sound and reproducible scholarship rests upon the foundation of robust and accessible data, and that data should be considered legitimate, citable products of research. I have listed the data citation principles here, but I'm going to leave it up to you to read that in more detail. The parts of data citation that are important is to provide credit and attribution, that there are unique identifiers that really make sure that any citation can be linked properly to that particular data set that is being cited, that there is persistence in access to the metadata and to the data themselves, that there is versioning in case data are being modified, corrected over time. Again, that's important for any reproducibility of the data, and that they stay interoperable in the evolving cyber infrastructure. As I mentioned, this is an ongoing debate, and there will be further developments. There are a variety of groups that work with it, and this is another great report that was released last year by a group of people. One, Jan Brase from Germany, is actually the current president of DataCite. People from the library world, primarily internationally, focusing the effort on how data should be cited and how that can actually be implemented on a scale, such procedures. And many different organizations. I'm not going to get further into this, but just wanted to be a little bit more real. How does this look, data citation? So I'm giving you an example here of the global multi-resolution topography, which is a big synthesis data set of bathymetry and elevation models that was described in a paper published in GCubed. So the data set is identified by a DOI here under the second bullet, 10.159/AIDA/10000001. This DOI is cited in the actual article that has, as you see here, a different DOI, which, that's the article. The article here is a GCubed paper. And this paper cites the DOI here in a way that it has the dx.doi.org, which links the data set to a metadata set that is maintained by the DOI Foundation. So that provides you an actionable URL that you can click on, and you will immediately get to the data set itself. So what are the benefits of going through all the trouble of data publication? What's the benefit for you as a researcher or as a person who handles the data, who acquires the data in the field and in the lab? First of all, it really ensures scientific integrity, that publishing your data and citing its location in research papers will allow others to work with the data, to replicate and validate the research results and the data, and thus improve the scientific record of your specific community and even broader. It will increase the impact of your research. Data can be reused and it can be cited, and I will have another slide that actually gives a real-world example how your citation record can be improved and the impact of the research. And what is actually really interesting is that when you publish data and you organize it properly, you benefit your own data management. You will be able to better identify, retrieve, and understand your data in the long term. And we've had a really interesting experience in the past year as AIDA launched a data rescue initiative that helped investigators, especially investigators close to retirement, organize all their data. And they really came back to us and said, well, if I'd known how to do it, I would have done it earlier and I wouldn't have had all the problems I'm having now in trying to understand the data that I generated 20 years ago, but that's still incredibly useful to a large number of people. So this is the example that I mentioned. It's from library science researcher Heather Pivovar, who studied how the open sharing of data can enhance the citation rate. And so this is a study that she did. She compared clinical trials that did not make their data publicly available, which was about 52% of these trials, and 48% made their data available. And in the citation record, these 48% that shared their data actually received 85% of all the citations. So those clinical trial studies here that did not share their data had a lot less citations over the 2-year time period. So what can you do for data publication? I mean, the options are to either put it into institutional repositories. For example, we here at Columbia University have something called the Academic Commons repository, where you can deposit both articles and data sets. We have the conventional publication where you include data tables as electronic supplements and so on. Or there is an increasing number of data journals that actually publishes the data with short explanation about the data, about the methods that were employed and that were used to acquire the data, and the ways they were corrected, further reduced to final results, and the data quality explanation. And then there are disciplinary repositories, the example here being EarthChem, which is a repository for geochemical data. The best practice that is emerging all over the place is that data should be published at a trusted data repository while the research results should be published in a journal. And both can be linked by citing each other with the DOI. So the data in the repository can include in the metadata profile a link to the article that has the research results or the interpretations of the data, while the article in the journal will cite the data by the data DOI. An example here, or there are two examples how journals are increasingly advocating this procedure. Elsevier encourages authors to deposit the raw experimental data at relevant data repositories, and they're coming up with lists of which databases, which data centers, data repositories have the right infrastructure to ensure long-term access to the data and so on. And the same is true for AGU, that's part of the new data policy encouraging authors to identify and archive their data in appropriate data centers. So what are actually repositories where the data should go? It's clear, as I mentioned earlier, just publishing on some website or in a database that a single investigator may have put together is not really a way that ensures long-term access, long-term preservation, curational procedures that are relevant. So there is a term in use right now of trusted repositories. There is even an ISO standard of what a trusted repository is like. But the most important criteria of a repository that is fit for holding the data is that it provides open access to the data, that it has some arrangements, either holding the data in the long term itself or having arrangements with other long-term archives to take the data for long-term preservation, that any data set in there that is curated by them is persistently and uniquely identified, and that there is a certain level of data quality assurance through established review procedures, which can be internal review procedures but publicly accessible and reviewable, or through peer review. Many of these trusted repositories are at the library level or institutional level, like university level. What they provide is clearly the long-term archiving and the data quality and the quality assurance of metadata. This is sort of the core set of metadata that they take for each data set: the title, the creators or author names, the publisher, which could be a data repository, would be in this case the California Digital Library, year, the unique identifier, and citation to the data set, as I mentioned, the link to a publication and so on. Now, these very generic data repositories will clearly ensure long-term access to the data, but I am convinced that it requires domain-specific, discipline-specific expertise to ensure that the data can be reused in the long term. So I think that domain-specific repositories are best poised to ensure a fitness for reuse through very domain-specific, community-driven data stewardship. They must clearly have the same professional data curation services that I mentioned before, like long-term archiving, the persistent unique identification, and metadata registration with DOI, so the data sets can be discovered. And they must integrate with the publishing world and the scientific literature. But they can add a lot of value to the data. They can work, or they do work actually, with the communities, with the specific disciplines to develop and maintain standards for data and metadata, which go into a more sophisticated level of data description, like uncertainties, like data quality procedures, method descriptions, and so on. They can establish community-based vocabularies, taxonomies for rocks or for biological species and so on that should be used in the description of the data sets. They can provide software tools that are basically customized to the specific discipline to help users deal with the data, submit the data, describe the data, and so on, preferably very early in the process of acquiring the data. And they can provide a lot of user support and training that facilitates the data submission. Through establishing these standards that I mentioned earlier, they will ensure that the data is harmonized and integrated in a way that it can be further analyzed, that data mining becomes possible, which is not possible if you have just a catalog of metadata that points to individual data sets in PDF format or in spreadsheet format. And these data facilities can also ensure that the data is available to other systems and standards-based interfaces for interoperability. And I think this is particularly relevant to the critical zone observatories because the data generated at the CZOs is so diverse that multiple disciplines and multiple discipline-specific data repositories will be involved, and so making all the data available in a way that they can be accessed by visualization tools, by the CZO data portal, and so on, is really important in this context. So just giving you an example of, this is the data facility that I'm heading right now, the Integrated Earth Data Applications, or IEDA, where we have a lot of disciplinary expertise in the fields of geochemistry, marine geophysics and geology, geochronology, and other disciplines in the solid earth sciences. We hold sensor data as well as sample-based data and from observations and experiments. We hold raw data, field data, lab data, gridded data, time series, and so on, all kinds of things. But we do work on a community, on a basis very close to the community, and data managers and the scientific leadership comes right out of the domain to understand the data. It is a facility within the NSF definition, funded through a cooperative agreement, and has a whole set of professional policies for data management, including the persistent identification of both data and samples. And there's going to be in a few weeks another CZO webinar on samples and unique identifiers for samples. We have a standards-compliant metadata catalog, long-term archiving agreements for our data sets, and quite elaborate risk management. And we have gone through an accreditation process as a member of the World Data System. The data repository services that we provide are the maintenance of a standards-compliant metadata catalog, data publication. With DataCite, we are a publication agent with DataCite. We maintain online data submission tools, ensure quality control of data sets and metadata. I mentioned the risk management, long-term preservation. But what we also do, and this is kind of unique still, is the cross-referencing with journals and the data citation index. And just to show you an example, here's an article with Elsevier, and it shows here in the sidebar that data for this article is available at IEDA. When you click on the link here, you go straight to the data set that is relevant for this particular article. Same thing is true for geochemical data here. It would show IEDA, EarthChem. You click on it, and you go to a data table that shows the data from this particular article. lots of user support, investigator support for generating data management plans and data compliance supports and so on. I won't go into much detail. And this is our data publication process, and we will, I'm not sure of the date, Anthony will be able to say that, show you more of this whole process and how you can actually submit your data to AIDA, what the tools are so they can go here into the AIDA repository, and how to coordinate that with the submission of manuscripts to the journals, and how this process here will link in with tools provided at the CZOData partner. So I think that was me, and I'm handing over to Anthony now.
All right, thank you, Kerstin. So as Kerstin described, data publication with a capital P is really about putting your data in a data repository that has all these systems in place to ensure persistence and unique identification and archiving. And let's see, we got a little feedback from somebody who disconnected. Amelia, I'm going to mute you and see if that helped. Aha. So what the CZO data system is not is its own data repository. Rather, the CZO data system, as we described last week, is a way to homogenize data presentation and make it all available in the CZO data portal. And a lot of that is work in progress in terms of there's still a good bit of work about how we present our data regarding the really homogenized views that are called the CZO display format, and also work in harmonizing the way in which we use controlled vocabularies. But regardless, we have a CZO data portal that is essentially a metadata catalog that one can search and discover data sets throughout our CZOs. And what that does is that it just points toward the repository where the data set is located. So, because it's a metadata catalog. What we're beginning to do is we've developed these CZO dataset pages, which you see a screenshot of right here. And this is a means that we're going to present in detail tomorrow with a kind of a walkthrough, a hands-on demonstration walkthrough of how to get the data sets into this. But at the very bottom, you see a link to an actual data set. And as I mentioned last week, right now, all of these data sets are residing on CZO web servers. So currently, there is no capital P with regard to this publication. But where we're going with this is that there are indeed means to publish data sets with a capital P so that these pointers to files don't need to sit to point at files that are on your individual servers, but they could point to files that are in data repositories with DOIs. And in fact, that's what we are encouraging people to do. Kerstin, you want to go to the next slide? Okay. So at the bottom of every one of our data pages, there is a CZO data use policy, which I'm going to discuss a little bit here about how we plan on doing this. But before I jump into this, I wasn't sure if Kerstin had pointed this out, is that Kerstin just described in general the concept of data repositories and described in detail what AIDA offers with its repository. It offers a lot to our CZO community, but it may not offer everything. And as Kerstin described, the optimal repository for your data is a community repository that is best serves your data and your community. So if you are doing biodiversity or biomolecular data sets, you may not want to choose EarthChem. There may be other data repositories that better suit you and will better support your data and make it linkable and discoverable and build tools around it to enhance its value. So we've, at the CZOData team group, we've discussed some of those various repositories, and we should probably relatively soon list some of the ones that we might recommend. But the reason we haven't really listed them all yet is because we're also interested in your input. So, for example, some of the CZOs are co-located with LTERs. LTERs have a data portal that's built off of using ecological markup language and cataloged using a system called Metcat, and those are all federated in the Data One network. And that would be an excellent data repository for data, especially if it was ecological data, for a CZO that was within an LTER. And in fact, there's another system that has been developed that's more general, that more or less uses the exact same tools that anybody in the world can use, whether or not you're associated with an LTER. I forget the exact name of that. I think the Network for Biocomplexity or something like that. So we'll be pointing you all in the direction of these other repositories relatively soon. So let's talk about the data use policy. So you've probably all glanced at the slide that's been up for a little while now. This is something that we started developing organically that basically has 3 clauses. And they are use our data freely, and there are some definitions that are at the bottom. All of our data products, except those labeled private, are released to the public and may be freely copied, distributed, edited, remixed, etc. Non-CZO data products, like those produced by USGS or NOAA, which you might point to through our portal because they're quite relevant, are obviously outside of this data use policy because those organizations have their own policies. And we want to give proper acknowledgement. As you see here, you've heard about datasite.org and the fact that they now have these recommendations for the minimum amount of attribution that should be given to a data set, and that these are real citations. They're not just kind of these fuzzy things like I downloaded this from some website, but it's much more official than that. And then lastly, we have a clause about letting us know how you will use your data. And this is really just a courtesy. There's nothing really that strongly worded there. But we're just, as CZOs, interested in knowing how our CZOs are benefiting the community. So that's just a secondary clause. So we have defined CZO data products as data collected with any monetary or logistical support from a CZO. That includes a data set that, let's say, a loose collaborator who shows up at your CZO site and says, you know, I've got some money on a separately funded project. I want to analyze these, I want to collect this data at your CZO, but I'm not really sure where to go, and I'm going to need a little bit of assistance in the field. That person goes and does that work, and we would strongly encourage you to basically, before you get started, say, yeah, all of that's fine, but we need you to publish your data in the CZO data system when you're done, and basically abide by some of our data policies. So that's, and I'm going to get into that a little bit in the second policy. And then the very last concept is this idea of private data. Everything that Kerstin described, you know, publishing data with a capital P, involves releasing it to the public. You can't get a DOI on a data set that is private. So, however, there's a lot of needs for us to begin the process of collecting metadata on data sets and perhaps even sharing them within a smaller circle of team members that the CZO community would really like to promote, right? I mean, that's what CZOs are all about. They're about close collaboration, and within your CZO, there should be a lot of motivation to share those data sets early. Plus, if you wait for that grad students to get their publication published and you know, in press before you begin the process of organizing their data set for publication with a capital P, then it may be too late to collect all the relevant metadata. So what we're encouraging is that you begin the process, and the CZO system that we're developing and that we're going to demo on Thursday of this week has an option to actually build the entire metadata profile to get it cataloged at the CZO web portal and have everything in place and everything public acknowledgement of what's there, of who created it. Everything would be public except for actual access to the file with the data values in it. That way you can begin to get credit for what you have done even before you're ready to fully release it to the public. And others can also begin to become aware of what may be soon released to the public so that they can begin to think about ways in which they can collaborate with you because you've got this data set that is maturing. Can you go to the next slide, Kerstin? Oh, that's kind of a repeat, I guess, the formatting. So what I wanted, before we move to the next slide, there's a link at the very bottom here, which basically shows the content of what you've just seen. These this text is all on the National CZO website underneath Access CZO Data, and you can scroll down to the bottom of the screen or add this hashtag data use agreement to see the full text, and it is still a draft. Next slide, Kerstin. So we have a second document, which is a little bit different than the first document. The first one is data use, right? It's basically what do outsiders agree to when they use your data. And this one is slightly different. This is more about sharing data. This is what your investigators within your CZOs should agree to before they begin working in your CZO. This is a little bit harder to see, but it's at the same link that you saw earlier. And it has 4 main clauses. The first one is that if you are considered a CZO, if you're producing a data set that's considered a CZO data product, and I defined that earlier, and this definition describes it in a little bit more detail, then you're agreeing to share your data privately with other CZO investigators within your CZO within a year of collection. And that, again, is mostly about sharing the metadata, but also putting it in a place where others can actually see the data values. Not everybody, so it's not fully public, but collaborators can see the metadata. And then you're promising to release the data to the public within 2 years. Now, anybody can release their data to the public much sooner than that, but this is kind of the default maximum amount of time one should hold on to your data set without prior written permission. And that is what the third clause is that you can request in writing to hold on to your data for additional time. And there are some data sets, especially in some domains, geochemical domains, in which the lab work itself may require 4 years and it may not be completed. So one can extend the privacy period for 1 year without a big deal, but up to 4 years would be something that we would consider an extreme case that would be granted with only very good reason. So, and then lastly, the last clause is the requirement that hopefully every data CZO collaborator would sign on to, that to use private data for which you have access because you're a member of a CZO, and by being a member of a CZO, you have access to this private data repository, that to use that data, you have to first consult with the creators of that data set prior to use. And this is a really big issue about ensuring that if one posts data to a private repository, that there are some written down protocols for how that data will be protected. So even though it's private, you know that you're sharing it with other collaborators within the CZO, but there's a level of a protection that you have against others, using that data set before it's fully mature. So we all know the horror stories that even within collaborative teams, sometimes that trust can be breached. And so this is a really clear statement to try and give confidence to people who are sharing the data, and also to make people who might want to use private data know that there are consequences for breaching the ethical constraint that's stated here. So these are drafts. They have not been officially adopted unanimously by the CZO PIs. They were drafted about a year ago after quite a bit of work by the data managers of the original 6 CZOs, and with some consultation from the 6 CZO PIs at the time. But we decided to put it on hold for a year to just kind of let it settle in. So 2 different agreements, one for anybody who uses the data that is public, and then this one is more about what a collaborator or co-PI on a CZO should agree to before essentially being allowed to collaborate within the CZO. Can you move to the next slide, Kerstin? So these documents are beginning to look like they, maybe click ahead here, because I think I had a couple of slides that, yeah, click ahead to the next one. I'd kind of pasted different portions of this at larger font, but I guess when you inserted them, they formatted in an odd way. Yeah, move ahead. One more. Okay, now one more after that, sorry. So you can read all these details online. So these are beginning to look quite a bit like legal documents, and it was brought to my attention that as we were developing, that the first data use agreement actually looked almost identical to a Creative Commons attribution license. And this was one of the reasons why we put this effort on hold, because I was suggesting that we essentially adopt a requirement that CZO data be released with a Creative Commons attribution, a Creative Commons license. Any of these would work. And maybe a requirement is too much of a word, but with a strong suggestion that if we adopt a data use policy, that it be given a Creative Commons license. You can read more about these 6 different flavors if you go to creativecommons.org. Kerstin, can you connect to the next slide? I just have a couple more slides left here. The reason Creative Commons is a really good idea is because with the little logo that you saw there, with the very short name, that confers a whole lot of information that is really a much more efficient way of communicating what we are trying to do than the language that we came up with ourselves. It has legal code, the Creative Commons licenses have two written versions of text, one that is kind of a lay version, which is very, very similar. If you look at it, it's almost identical to what we have. And there's the ability to customize it by adding the copyright holder and then an additional stipulation, like, if you would let us know how you're using the data. That totally fits within the Creative Commons. But then underneath that is a rock-solid legal document, because these are official, legally binding copyrights. They just don't reserve all the rights. They just reserve some of the rights, right? So you often see all rights reserved. Well, a Creative Commons or open copyright actually doesn't reserve all the rights. It just reserves a couple, the primary ones being attribution, but sometimes additional ones. So there's that human readable text, there's the legal code, which will stand up in a court of law, and then there's a machine readable little script that usually gets attached to documents that have a Creative Commons license, so that these data systems and document systems can actually sort by which Creative Commons license is there. So this is a really, I think, powerful combination that would do a much better job of protecting those of us who want foremost to maintain attribution and credit for our data products. That's the primary thing that I think all of us want. The Creative Commons copyright will actually do a better job of that than what we can write ourselves. Kerstin, there's one last slide if you can forward to. And this is just to underline the point that Creative Commons licenses are being reviewed by lawyers, and those reviews are being published quite extensively. So there really is a body of law that's now beginning to understand what Creative Commons is. And so by hitching our wagon to Creative Commons, it really will help us out in the long run, because someone who sees the Creative Commons logo will immediately know what they're talking about, or what we're talking about if they're familiar with it. And if it ever shows up in a court of law for any reason at all, there's a whole body of work behind it. So, I guess we're running a little low on time, but that last bit was meant to be a little bit of a background to kick off some discussions about trying to finalize our data use and data sharing agreements, which in turn will help us publish our data with a capital P. So I think we're at the end of our presentation. It should be the last slide, I think. Right, Kerstin? Yeah, there we go. Any questions for Kerstin or I? You can type it in or speak up. You have to unmute yourself. I know most of you are muted now. If you need to unmute yourself, go up to the green bar at the top of your screen, and there's a little microphone that you can click unmute or mute. All right. Well, while we're waiting for someone to formulate a question or figure out where the unmute button is, I'll state that we have recorded this presentation. I'm going to post that recording online at criticalzone.org for that one website, that one page that's going to describe all of our cyber seminars. And I got that link up only last night for last week's cyber seminar. I know at least one person who viewed it successfully, so that's good news. Any questions? Thoughts? Everything look good?
I would suggest, I mean, if anybody does have a question that comes up later, they could just mail to, you know, either info@aidadata.org or to Anthony via Critical Zone mail.
Yeah. Kerstin had also offered to do a little bit more of a walkthrough for how to register a data set at EarthChem or AIDA, which I think would be a great idea for those data sets that are there, that are already ready to go and are already public. Why not give them DOIs and archive them in the EarthChem repository or EarthChem library? I think. So if there's interest, Kerstin could set up a little webinar sometime in the next week or two to have somebody from her team do a walkthrough demo. Okay. We're getting some thanks via the chat session. I guess I'll end by reminding folks that we have this Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're doing the next cyber seminar on the list. That will be kind of part 2 for protocols for sharing CZOData. And there we're going to dive into how to register data files via criticalzone.org, which, as I described last week, will very soon basically allow two things to happen. Not only the data set to show up immediately on the criticalzone.website, or at least the description of the data set and pointers to the data set, but very soon we'll also have some software running in the background that will register the metadata as a service under the CZO GeoPortal catalog. We're also going to discuss next week a little bit about where we want to go with CZO display file. All right. Well, thank you all. And sounds like no one wants to pipe in with a big question or a comment. So feel free to do that next time. We definitely want these to be discussions, although I know the presentations are going a bit long. We're trying to cover a lot of stuff. All right, I'll end the meeting, signing out. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.